amazing. We're sort of seeing lots and lots of amazing hearts are like streaming up the side of my phone, and wow, we've got over 100 people here. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, you're here for her. This is Lucy Holland, and this is her absolutely magnificent book. I have tried my very best to coordinate. I found like blue and black and gold, but nothing is ever going to be quite as beautiful as this cover. I think I screamed a little bit when I saw it. Lucy, did you do the same?
Oh yes, massively. Yeah, I honestly, it dropped into my inbox out of the blue with no warning at all.
So I'm going to be asking you a little bit about this book, but first of all, for people who sort of don't know either the book or Lucy yet, I can guarantee that you will want to know more about both by the time we've finished. So we'll be on here chatting for about an hour. If you've got any questions, you can send them in a direct message, and I will try and find those. Please be kind to me. This is my first ever time hosting an Instagram Live. First of all, thank you to Waterstones, who have had us both on to talk about this lovely book tonight. So any questions, send it in a direct message, or also put them in the... somebody's asked about the cover artist. I have a note on that. And we're going to discuss the cover a bit more, because it really is something that needs to be recognized. I mean, it's an absolutely sort of, it's a work of art. I mean, everything inside the book is a work of art, but the picture on the front particularly is. Let me quickly just sort of finish off telling you about Lucy. This is her fourth book. Previously, she is the author of an epic fantasy trilogy. So there's obviously some sort of shared DNA between those wonderful books and this one. But Sistersong is something different. It is historical fiction, but kind of shot through with this sort of gleaming golden threads of magic. And I can tell you, it is one of two books last year that made me cry. Anyone who knows me knows that that's an achievement. When she's not writing amazing books, Lucy is also the host of an award-winning podcast. It's sort of books and feminism and just sort of generally brilliant chat that is called Breaking the Glass Slipper. So hopefully at the end of the evening, you may want to go and sort of connect with Lucy in all sorts of ways. But anyway, we will start. Lucy, sort of over to you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this gorgeous cover, and also about the three characters that we see on there.
Sure. Well, yeah, before I get too far away from the cover artist, that is cool. It's a lady at Pan Macmillan who works in the art department called Melissa, and Melissa is the amazing artist who drew this cover and came up with the concept, which I was astonished actually, because anyone who's read Sistersong will know it has three protagonists, not just one, and they've all got first person perspective, so it's quite intense. And I was very impressed that Pan Mac managed to get all three protagonists onto the cover, because usually you have to focus in on one element. You know, and there's a lot of elements in Sistersong to be focused on. You could go down the heart motif. We'll be talking about that later, I'm sure. You could focus on the historical element, or maybe folklore and mythology, you know, or of course you could pick one of the characters. But I'm so delighted that they actually managed to get all of them on, because at its heart, Sistersong is a story about siblings and about sisterhood, and the bonds that we share with the people closest to us.
So take us back in time, because obviously the world of Sistersong it's a very unfamiliar one. I mean, it's firmly rooted in a real historical moment, although obviously you have sort of added magic into it, and we'll talk sort of a little bit about why you chose to do that, and not to write this sort of just as kind of sort of pure history, but sort of set us the scene, give us the pitch. Where are we, what's going on, and who are these three siblings here?
So the three siblings are the children of King Cador of Dumnonia. Dumnonia is the ancient name for Devon and Cornwall. I'm currently in Devon, So it is a spot of local history for me, which I absolutely adored researching because I had no idea how fascinating this period actually was. We're talking roughly 535 AD, so pretty early on. This period used to be called the Dark Ages, but that term is no longer in use because it's, you know, a lot of stuff's been unearthed recently, basically to say that this region in time was not dark at all, and you know, it's pretty, you know, it's not a very nice thing to call it that, because actually there were people, you know, creating incredible art. They were writing books and recording, you know, their history. And there's an awful lot to show that, you know, there was lots going on, that it just separated from now by just a massive gulf of time. And that was both a blessing and a curse for me, because on one hand, okay, there's not a lot of primary sources, and that was a pain because I had to, you know, really do some digging and had to fill in gaps when, you know, I just simply didn't have the information at hand. But I really wanted to make that historical period come to life, and I wanted to, you know, approach it with a good deal of realism. But on the other hand, this is a historical magical folktale. And I knew that this ballad that I'm sure we'll be talking about in a minute, but Sistersong is based on a kind of old English folk ballad. There is a very strong element of magic running through that. So picking a historical period that allowed me to slip in some magic and make it organic without just dropping it in the middle of the book. I think it was a real blessing to find a period that I felt worked really well. So, you know, to ground it in history, but also to make it feel like the magic was an organic part of that history and that period.
Lots of people sort of putting little comments down here saying, like, can't wait to get this book, and you know, like, can't wait to read it. I'm telling all of those people, like, it is so worth it. Like, you know, it's when it sort of fell into my hands, it was like a sort of little time machine back in history, but also back to a kind of history that was sort of somehow even better than the real thing, because all of those myths and legends, you have kind of called them out of the forest and sort of rooted them in these very real lives. So tell us about your research process. I mean, you know, you've sort of said that, I mean, you're from Devon, right? So this story is taking place sort of there. I mean, what is the world of that time? We're talking early 6th century. So Rome has gone. Christianity is has arrived. What's sort of going on at that time, and what sort of, you know, records? I mean, were you sort of wandering around archaeological sites? I mean, how did you sort of feed your imagination to tell this story of this incredibly distant time in a way that feels so like you could reach out and touch it? It really does.
Well, the closest piece of actual evidence is about 1.5 miles from my house, up on Peak Hill, and it's there's been unearthed some remains from it's a Neolithic settlement, but also a sub-Roman, which is perfect because that is absolutely the period that I chose to set Sistersong in. So I went up there. Obviously, there's nothing that you can really see now. It's simply a very high piece of land right on the edge of the coast. So very defensible. But you can see out across the incredible kind of rolling, iconic Devon landscape. So you can actually kind of, I've done a few videos for Instagram actually and post them just to show people the landscape, because it is hopefully very evocative. I really wanted to kind of get that across in the book. As to research, this is difficult. There we have one primary source, and that comes from Gildas, who was a kind of irascible priest, not very nice, had very few nice things to say about anyone really, and left behind him a kind of excoriating tract, half of which was a history of Britain. And the other half was a kind of rant about 5 kings that he thought really needed to change their ways and be better kings. One of which is Constantine, and I might mention him a little bit later on because he was a direct influence on one of the central characters in Sistersong. So Gildas is a character. I was kind of inspired. I liked the idea of him kind of being in the book because it was another direct link to history. And my links are quite tenuous. My other direct links to history are, everyone may have known of Cerdic and Cynric. They're very often included in Arthurian retellings because what we know of them is that they were Saxons who landed on the coast of Hampshire probably around 485, but we don't know because the history is just so shady. And the Anglo-Saxons were very keen in the time of Alfred to link their history and their line of kings back to these two men because they felt that their lineage, it was a lineage strengthening thing. You know, it made them seem purer and strong and heroic. So we don't really know very much about the lives of Cynric or Cerdic, but we do know that they existed and they won some pretty important battles. And those two characters were, you know, again, like Gildas, kind of important for me to root Sistersong in this real history of Britain. But because of Arthurian myth is a tricksy thing. Everybody is very familiar with King Arthur, but we have no evidence that King Arthur actually existed. So I'm the first person to say I love mythology, and I love the way that mythology and history intersect. And I thought that was another reason why Sistersong would be perfectly, this story could be told in a historical period that was already rich and soaked in mythology and these legends that we have.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a couple of sort of questions sort of come in already. So this one is from Mayor Shah, who says, how do you find common ground between present day authors, readers, and ancient tales? So, you know, my answer to that as a reader would be that you just made me really care about these characters. You know, like actually at one point you did just rip out my heart and kind of trample on it, basically. But you know, but it is, I mean, you are talking about an age that is not only very distant, but is one that we don't know a huge amount about. You've just sort of mentioned Arthur and Arthurian legend, but you know, this is not a book about the Tudors. So was that, I mean, were you put off by that at all? Did you think like, will this book ever find an audience? Am I writing something that's sort of so obscure? You know, how did you sort of have the confidence to feel that you could bring this period to readers today?
The answer is I didn't really have any confidence in that at all. It was all a big experiment because I came from writing secondary world fantasy, and I wrote 3 of those books, and I felt like I needed to challenge myself. I needed to grow as a writer. And I've always had an interest in historical fiction, but I have a very strong interest in fantasy, and I thought there would be wouldn't there be a wonderful way? I'm sure there is a wonderful way to unite these two interests and have something that still allows me to feel like I'm writing fantasy, but at the same time allows me to actually do some digging into my own, you know, the history of my own country. And it's just such an interesting time period, and so little has been written about it. And there are actually quite a few stories are set here. There's you were saying the Tudor period, it's massively popular. Everyone seems to be into the Tudor period, but the minute you say 500 AD, it's like, oh, there's not really that many. Conversely, the Romans, I mean, the Romans in Britain are also another very popular era, and I just felt like, well, there's obviously a chunk of time here where nothing happened in it, or we think that nothing happened because it was the Dark Ages. But the more I kind of dug into this, the more interesting this time became, and you can see how kind of legends were intersecting. You can see the formation of the Kingdom of England, and that was really, really interesting, because it kind of came about when people were talking about Brexit a lot. You know, there was this chat about what makes Britishness. And the more I researched into this, the more I began to realize how much we're a patchwork nation of peoples who come from everywhere. You know, and you know, I'm writing a story about you know, a group, a tribe, a native British tribe who were kind of in this area, the Dumnonians, you know, fighting the loss of what they perceived way of life and their culture. Christianity was a big threat to their tribal kind of paganism that they've been following for hundreds of years. And then, of course, the Saxons were Germanic invaders that came and were pushed gradually westwards. So that is a culture that was not their own. And yet, when we talk about Britishness, I mean, I thought, what is Britishness really when it comes down to it? Because, you know, we have so many influences, and we don't even need to go into the Anglo-Normans who came after and usurped the Saxons. I mean, it's just a constantly evolving history, and I wanted to capture elements of that in Sistersong, you know, to say that, you know, to very often have that, even though there's this great enemy and it's coming closer and closer, to say that, well, what is this enemy really? And, you know, knowing that we all become one people eventually. It's lucky that I have this hindsight, because it kind of gives me a, you know, a bit of a like God's eye view down onto the lives of these people. But of course, stories are always told from the ground up. So it was important for me to kind of get to know characters like the three you see here on the front cover, in order to be able to tell this much larger story that I seem to be rambling on about.
So, I mean, tell us about these three then, because here is a question that came in earlier from Marina Pye. Marina, I don't know if you're with us right now. Hello, thank you for your question. And Marina wants to know sort of when and where did the seed of the novel start? Now, I know that you've talked about sort of drawing inspiration from an old ballad, the Trois Sisters. That, if I'm pronouncing that right, that's two of them, right? You've got three people on your cover, so what's the story there? And tell us, you know, sort of tell us their names and a little bit more about them, because they are the heart of the story. And you know, as you just said, on the one hand you've got this sort of God's eye kind of view down of like this amazing sort of new world coming into being, and yet we never lose sight of, we're very, very close to these three people who are living through it. So tell us a bit more about them and how their characters sort of connect with that original inspiration of from the ballad.
So the ballad, as an overview, is a story of sibling rivalry. It's got many names. It's sometimes called The Dreadful Wind and Rain. It's called Bonnie Swans. It's very basically a story about two women fighting over a man. And it's, in a way, it's quite patriarchal, really. I know, don't even go there. But what I really liked about it, and I mean, it's not hugely spoilerific to say that, you know, because the ballad exists in many forms already, so you can go and listen to it after this. If you do go and listen to it, check out Lorena McKennett's Bonnie Swans, because that is the version that directly inspired this book. When I heard it about 8 years ago, I knew I had to write this into a novel. And the story is quite strange. An older girl pushes her younger sister in the river, and won't pull her out again unless that girl says, oh, okay, I'll give you my man, I'll give up any claims I have on him. And of course, any self-respecting woman would do no such thing. So of course, the younger sister drowns. The story might end there, but instead, her body is pulled out of the river and created. It's made into a harp. It's carved up into a harp, and the harp sings without being played, and it tells the story of what happened. It tells reveals the truth of the murdering sister, who is of course swiftly condemned. And I don't know, but that story I just thought was fantastic. It's so weird, you know, like you think it's just going to be a poor ending with a poor murdered girl, but no, not only murdered, she's actually cut up and made into a musical instrument. Who made this? Who makes this shit up? I don't know. I had to write this story though. I thought, my goodness, how much is left unsaid? Who are these women? If they grew up together, why did they hate each other so much? How can if you grow up with someone, what drives, what sort of envy, what level of envy must you have for someone to actually kill them if it's, you know, if that person is your sister?
I mean, you have a sister, right?
I do.
You have never wanted
I
to
do.
like drown your sister and turn her into a harp.
I have to. Well, I hope she's not watching this. No, of course not. Of course not.
No comment.
Naturally, would never do such a thing. No, but it's a good question though, because it's like, well, how on earth do you how do you go about, you know, untangling this? Because it's all very well to kind of, you know, this is the problem with a lot of folk ballads, and women specifically in folk ballads, that they often get assigned stereotypical roles and they get dropped into these roles, and we expect to see them fulfilled. You know, we expect a lustful, murdering harpy versus a chaste and pure-hearted younger sister, and we know which one we're supposed to be rooting for. But I don't like being told who to root for, and I always thought there must be more to this story. There must be motivation in there. There must be a backstory behind the murder and why these sisters fell out in the first place. And actually, was it murder? Maybe it was a tragic accident. So there was an awful lot to unpack.
You do something amazing in this book, which is that you, like, my feelings about the three main characters were changing constantly. You know, like my favorite character on page, you know, 20 was definitely not my favorite character by page 200. You know, you kind of yeah, I was just, you know, sort of like kind of awestruck by how well you played us. Or me, maybe I'm just, you know, sort of like super susceptible, but yeah, I mean, you really caught that dynamic beautifully. You've told us about two sisters, so who's the, and it's a ballad of two sisters, but we have three people on the covers, so who's our missing party here?
Okay, so the interesting thing about the ballad is that in some versions a third sibling is mentioned. It's typically a daughter. Usually there's a king lives in the North Country and he has daughters 1 to 3. And you're, oh, okay, he's got three daughters, but I don't really know anything about the third one, or i.e. the middle child. And that was interesting because it got me thinking as to kind of why people might be erased from stories. You know, why don't we remember that third sibling? And the ballad is, as I said, it's quite patriarchal. It's quite stereotypical. It paints women in certain roles, and they can't really escape from that. And one of the themes of Sistersong is this idea of people being trapped in the roles that they're forced to play and being unable to escape that. You know, and so that's, you know, it's an idea I wanted to explore, and I hopefully I try to explore that through introducing this third sibling back into the story that they were written out of. And in this case, this is Keen, one in the middle. Many people who've read Sistersong say that it's Keen's story, which I wouldn't disagree with. I think it is very much Keen's story. I think in a way it had to be, because the only way to retell or explore or answer any of those questions that the ballad doesn't answer was to introduce a third perspective, because we simply cannot trust the sisters to tell their own stories without the perspective of other people involved. And so I'm very wary of stereotypes and falling into tropes like that. So I wanted to make sure I got a kind of a whole, as broad a view of the story as possible. So Keen, this middle child, Keen is very close to my heart. Keen was there before either of his sisters really strolled in. I mean, the sisters is a crazy thing to say, because, you know, this is a ballad about sisters, but actually Reva and Sina, who are the sisters, their characters formed after Keen for me. Keen was always there in the shadows, waiting to kind of be given a chance to tell his side of the story. So in today we would say Keen is transmasculine, but of course this this word didn't really exist in Saxon times. Not to say people who are transgender didn't exist, absolutely not. And one of the reasons I wanted to to include Keen's story is to look at transgender people in history and say that this is not a modern concept. These people have always lived. We're human, and humans don't change that much. So while it might be a topic that seems to be in the news lately and everyone has an opinion, it's something that has been, people are people, and they've always been this way. And I wanted to put Keen back into this story and put it in a historical setting, kind of in order to kind of let him speak and say that, I'm here and I'm visible, and it's time for me to tell my story as well. And I liked the kind of symbolism of doing that within an existing framework, within an existing story, to say that these stories are constantly evolving and we're constantly retelling. And it's important that we constantly retell these stories, because we aren't the same people that we were 1,000 years ago. And I like the way that history, well, the idea of a retelling. I like how ballads, the way that they're remembered, the way that musicians continuously record new versions of them, that's something really intrinsic to storytelling, because we all want the chance to tell our stories in our own voices, in our own ways.
Yeah, and I loved the idea that history maybe remembered Keen as the man he knows himself to be. And that's, maybe why we don't see that part of his story. I mean, to me, that was like a sort of really beautiful sort of hope, and to see that kind of experience, sort of those lives kind of told, because, as you've said, the official history of the time was being written by Gildas, the monk, who really doesn't come across frightfully well in the book. And I seem to remember, I did history at university, and I seem to remember maybe one sort of excruciatingly boring week when we did actually have to look at sort of Gildas. God.
Oh dear, I'm sorry.
So I think you made the right choices in your narrators. So we had some more questions coming in, which are sort of kind of slightly craft questions. So let me just sort of try you on some of these. I think we've got quite a few, sort of writers with us in the in this conversation tonight. So Michael Hayes has a question of how did you do the research? I know that we've sort of touched on this a little bit, but I mean, did you read things? Is there sort of artwork? I mean, how much of it is sort of hard history, as it were, and how much was just sort of going and soaking up the atmosphere? Did you go and sort of sleep on the moors or something?
Oh gosh, no. That's very intrepid.
Oh,
I know, missed opportunity, right? It's okay. I'm writing a book about Cornwall. I'll go and sleep on the moors for that one. No, it was mostly the internet, because the internet is amazing, and there's a lot of it's not just Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia is great for an overview of a period, but what I found, the resource that I found most interesting are typically things that you'd find on archaeological sites. So very often there are people who are local interests, local enthusiasts, and they have their own blogs, and they document things on their own blogs and talk about specific local sites. And I got quite a lot of inspiration from stumbling really across those, in a Google search. Vic, you yourself gave me a very useful book, The Magical History of Britain, Martin Wall. Fantastic book for, when it's one of those times when you open the book and you read something, you're like, oh my God, this actually has my magic system detailed on the page before I even read the book. And it's when your imagination intersects with actual reality that is a real gift. And you think, wow, what was I channeling? This, when I talk about magic, I talk about, in Sistersong, it's very loosely based on kind of a land magic, a web of patterns, which kind of picks up on the theme of the connection with the land and with each other. And one of those, the Magical History of Britain kind of goes into paganism, and some of the old pagan beliefs and ideas like the ghost fence, which I put into Sistersong because I think that's so cool. It's ghost fence is when they took the skulls of their enemies and basically kind of erected them into a boundary fence to ward off other invaders, but also skulls were taken because they possessed intelligence, so the wisdom of your enemy becomes your wisdom, that sort of thing. And I just, it was very interesting reading about the kind of the gods that were worshipped then, because I wanted to obviously get this struggle between Christianity and paganism into the text, to really root that in as well. So that book was extremely useful for a kind of a cultural overview of that period. And the other really interesting piece of research was, of course, the Beltane Fire Festival that we went to.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, you've been to that. It was just, I just thought it was the atmosphere. It was at Butser Ancient Farm in Hampshire, and this ancient farm is amazing. They've created all these buildings from across periods of several hundred years, and there's Saxon buildings in there, and you can go and see original crafts and how things were made. And that was, and it was it had a straw man going up in flames, and so the whole atmosphere for that was just really, really good fun. It was I had quite a wild time just researching stuff. But I mean, I'd say that the internet was probably my closest friend when it comes down to it.
And I think this kind of comes into it. So we've had a question here from Reese Cameron, who. Another writer, presumably, because they're asking advice for keeping motivated. Now, on the one hand, that's kind of like, that's all of us in the middle of this pandemic. It's like, how do you actually sort of just find the headspace to sit down and just keep on going with anything, let alone a project sort of as big as somebody else who's been to Lost in Britannia. That place is like stepping back in time. I think you're talking about Butser Ancient Farm, right? Anyone who's not
yeah.
Butser Ancient Farm, it is absolutely. If you're writing historical fiction, you need to go. Yes, but sorry, back to Reese's question, which is sort of keeping motivated, because obviously a book like this, where I mean, it's intricately crafted. You've got 3 different POVs. You've got historical details that you need to get right. You've got a magic system that you need to kind of to create and to be realistic. So it's a heck of a lot of hard work. And I know that you were probably sort of working on writing this for about a year and a half. So and actually, were you writing part of it during the pandemic, or sort of editing it during the pandemic? Reese's fundamental question, which I'm now sort of rambling on, is advice for keeping motivated.
Advice for keeping motivated. Oh my god. No, I wasn't writing this one during the pandemic. Actually, it's my this was my non-pandemic book. This is mostly written before that. The first draft was actually written in 2018, so you can see how the publishing process works. Yeah. A long time ago. But yes, I did a lot more work on it last year to kind of polish it up and get it perfect condition. Motivation. It is really interesting because we're obviously coming out of lockdown again, and I found this second lockdown really difficult for motivation. I found it, my self-discipline took a big hit. I think because its novelty wore off, and last year it was wonderful to have all that extra time. But when you do have an awful lot of extra time, it becomes tempting to take it for granted and think, well, it's fine if I only write 100 words today because I'll make it up tomorrow. And I've really struggled with that this year, because you feel like it's kind of dragging on and on and on. So simply, I think that the trick is to kind of find a project that you really have all your heart invested in, and do fun things with it, like read around it. Find, if you're writing a book, find a TV program that, even if it's not totally on the subject, at least it's something similar and you can kind of keep your interest high. I like to also work with rewards, which is stupid, but, I say, okay, I can go and watch more of that C-drama if I write another 300 words today.
So you don't set yourself I know some writers sort of have like sort of a daily word goal, that sort of thing. You don't work like that.
I try, we used to work like that. That's really gone out the window in lockdown. I try to write 1,000 words a day, but I've been really struggling. It's just, yeah, the last, and then of course, Sistersong came out. Yeah, amazing amount of book promotion. My God, it takes up a lot of time. So it's very hard to get back into the kind of, you know, shut the world out. I can't look at my phone. I need to just get off Twitter for a morning, and that's really difficult because your phone's going off all the time. I should probably turn the internet off, but I'm not very disciplined about that. So I'm actually looking forward. I'm going back to work. Woo! I work for Waterstones. Hey, Waterstones, and I'm going back to work tomorrow. Yeah, for the first time since Christmas. So I'm actually looking forward to the fact that I now won't be able to play around with, oh, look at my oodles of time that I've got. You know, now I'll have to be a lot more disciplined with my free writing days, because they're going to be precious. You know, and I think in a way, when you have less time, it helps you to be more disciplined.
Yep. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, we've just had a comment here from Ria Lam. I'm sorry if that's not how I pronounce your name, but saying, I'm a physiotherapist and I'll be reading it in between patients. So, well, for a start, you may need to cancel a couple of patients. I'm just warning you, like if you know, when you reach certain bits of the story. But yeah, I mean, I that sort of, you know, finding time to write and having a story that you love so much that it's almost sort of painful to be away from it. You know, characters are like friends that you want to spend time with, right? So that's
absolutely, even though you hate them sometimes. No more! I hate this story, I hate it, but that's like a writer thing. Yeah, I'm sure you sympathize, because, you know, of course you wouldn't be writing the book if you didn't believe in it. But then, you know, with the writers, you just go through these awful periods of, this is the best thing I've ever done, and this is the worst thing I've ever done. So that's, yeah, I still struggle with that.
So we've had a question from Chloe K. Hi. Do you plan it all out, or do you just write?
I just write.
Do you?
Which is very silly. Yes, I know. I'm like a completely stupid person who does this. I also, yeah, I know it terrifies me. It terrifies even me. I don't really know why I do it. I do it because I'm terrible at plotting, and I feel very strongly that plot comes from character. And I don't know my characters very well at the beginning of a story because I haven't spent enough time with them to get to know them. And, you know, even at the end of a first draft, the novel that I actually wrote last year, my pandemic book, I rewrote the ending of that because I realized I just hadn't, you know, the character had just slipped away from me slightly, and what he did wasn't true to himself. And that's horrible. That's shock when you're like, oh God, I wasn't paying attention to this person. But if plot comes from character, you kind of, I feel personally, I need to spend a lot of time with these characters in order to kind of get to know them. And in which case it really does mean you open your laptop up and you go on the journey with them, and you say, I don't know what they're going to be doing today, but you have them in a certain place and you make them interact with other characters, and that's where plot comes from. It always comes from your characters interacting with the world that they find themselves in and other people in that world who may not so neatly intersect with their own views. And it's, you know, there's many times goes past when I think, my God, why don't I just sit down and plot this out? But it's simply not the way I work. I find writing for me is a very organic thing. And it very often inspiration will come when I'm in a stupid place like the shower or on the toilet, you know, and I'm like, I should really keep a notebook in there because, you know, otherwise I have all these ideas and I haven't gone and written them down, or I'm no boundaries, no limits. No, they just come whenever, you know, and you're like, oh, this is so inconvenient. Why can't I have this idea while I've got like a Microsoft Word document open in front of me? But it doesn't work like that. It's one of those, sometimes you have to turn off and let them sneak up on you unawares.
You're not alone. You're not alone. We have a comment down here from Lost in Britannia. I write it out too. We are crazy like that. Yes, in my humble opinion, you are crazy. But all I can say is that Sistersong, you know, totally validates your approach. I mean, it's
Well, this
absolutely
one.
beautiful, and you know, it twists and turns, and exactly as you've sort of said, you know, those twists and turns kind of come from the characters. So it really does feels beautiful. It's like they've sort of offered up their surprises to you and to us, the readers. You were just talking there about writing. So we had a question earlier from Daniel writing. What are you working on now? So obviously Sistersong is a standalone. It's a complete novel, beginning to end. No need to wait for like a next book in a series. Hooray! That's what we all need right now. But are there any more? I mean, have you sort of now got a kind of a bug for magical historical fiction?
Well, yes, is the short answer to that question. I did so much work on the period, and I found it so interesting that I thought, well, I would really quite like to do another historical book, but set in a, almost not maybe quite the same period, but something very close. So the second book is a follow-up rather than any sort of sequel. It's not linked in any meaningful way to Sistersong, but it does have a few cameos. So if you've read Sistersong, hopefully I've done a bit of fan service for you all. Because sometimes I can't leave my characters alone. I was only with them for one book, and because the world I've created is, I did quite a lot of work on kind of bringing this period to life, but also making it my own. Yeah. So weaving, for example, Keen's story, Keen has become quite an intrinsic part of my early medieval age Devon landscape. So to have, I thought like, in a way, I would like him to continue appearing, and in my heart that he does. He's kind of there, and he's part of that. And if you going back to Arthurian stuff, he's still in the landscape with us. It's the king under the hill kind of motif, and I like this idea of this kind of this eternal king watching us. So that idea is a bit linked to what I'm doing now. Another folktale, because I like mythology and I like folk tales, but this is a little bit different in that it's a little bit more fantasy than the Two Sisters is. It's actually about the wild hunt, so the hurler thing, and the yes, I know I do. Ever since I read Alan Garner, anyone read The Moon of Gomra?
Yeah,
right. So that book, oh God, I love his interpretation of I love the wild hunt in that. And Susan Cooper, Darkest Rising sequence also has her and the hunter in. And I just got obsessed with the origin story of the wild hunt, which is an ancient British king goes into the fairy world, basically, thinks that he's only feasting there for 3 days. But of course, when he comes out, the whole world is changed. 300 years have passed. The Saxons have taken his land. All the people that he knew are dead and dust. And my God, that's so powerful. And it's such a famous motif, the idea of feasting in fairyland and the fairies having, playing a trick on you, and you come back and, but I immediately started to think about, well, what would you really feel when you came out and you realized that? And then how would you spend the rest of your eternity? Because of course the leader of the wild hunt and the wild hunt itself are cursed. They are neither living nor dead. They have to ride until the end of time. So I just like this is an amazing myth, and I wanted to kind of get apply a bit of Sistersong to it. So the first thing I did is my hurler is an Iceni war chief, kin to Boudica. So she came from the Iceni tribe. She's a she, so that's another twist I've done on it. It's set 180 years after Sistersong. This is a Cornwall book, so it's still the West Country, but I've moved a little bit further west. So it's set around where Bodmin Moor is today. But of course, we've still got Wessex there. We've now got Mercia, and we've also got a bit of the She, the other world. So it's a little bit more magical in nature than Sistersong is, but it's still got a very strong historical setting, because I didn't want to really leave that behind.
Well, in the comments, you've already got people saying, can't wait. So anyway, add my name to that particular can't wait list.
I'm still writing it.
We've also got some love for Susan Cooper and Alan Garner. So, you know, you are among your own kind.
You're all my people.
You found your people. Bella has sent in a question saying, so Bella, I don't know if you've been having a tough lockdown, but anyway, Bella's question is, why are folktales so popular? Folktale retelling seems to be popular at the moment. Is it because reality is too stressful?
Probably. No, well, I mean, books of any sort of escapism is popular in difficult times, but I think this is to do with a bit what I mentioned before. I think we are all desperate in a way to tell these old stories in new ways, because very often, like fairy tales and folk tales, they're archetypal, and archetypes are powerful motifs that kind of run, and they're universal, and they run through, you know, every culture, every society, every time period, because they are linked to what makes us intrinsically, innately human. And I think that we'll always have retellings and reimaginings. I prefer the word reimagining to a retelling, because very often, you know, like I've done with Sistersong, and like a lot of people have pointed out, it really is. It's very much my story. What I've done with it is, I mean, the ballad is obviously there, and I used the ballad as a starting point. But what ended up coming out of it was something completely mine, which is nice to know that people think that, because I mean, I feel like it couldn't really be any other way, because we bring ourselves to these stories, and just a straight retelling wouldn't have been very interesting. I think we're lucky enough to you know, have these ancient stories still with us, but to be able to look at them through a 21st century lens, and apply our own ideas about society to them. I like the idea of those stories always being around for us to kind of, you know, to revisit and to retell and to make our mark on.
Yeah, and we've got the Children of Lear. Yes, we've got some folk enthusiasts in the room tonight. The Children of Lear is another absolutely beautiful one.
I love it. It's beautiful. That's the one about the when they turn into swans and they have to swim for 300 years on different pieces of water, and then they die tragically.
Swan and swimming for 300 years, or like being made into a bone harp.
Until the Christian bell tolls across the land.
It puts 2021 into perspective. It really does. Oh my God. Right, we still have more questions. Like people have loads of questions for you. We had a question from Kings, saying, could you recommend any good self-help books? Now, I'm going to presume that means writing self-help books, or maybe not. Feel free to answer as you wish. I mean, are you one of those writers that, you know, sort of has kind of read all of the manuals, the hero's journey, that sort of thing? Or, I mean, was it always like a fairly sort of intuitive thing for you?
That's going to make me sound so like, oh, it was really intuitive. But kind of it was. I mean, I do have things like the 7 basic plots and the hero with 1,000 faces, the Joseph Campbell, I think. But I don't actually remember reading them cover to cover. I think I dipped into them when I did my master's in creative writing. So, I mean, I've done courses, but I have to say I haven't read a kind of manual for writing. It's not to say that they're not extremely helpful, but I learned most of my kind of skills on the go, really, and by workshopping with other people. So, you know, I did. That's very, I mean, I always say, like, join a writing group, or make sure you share your writing regularly with other people, because you do very easily lose perspective on, you know, if you're kind of, because it's a very personal and quiet practice, really, being stuck inside your own mind with your own characters, with all facets of you. So it's very important to get people to look at your work from quite an early, you know, get it out there early. You know, it helps build up a thicker skin as well for all those endless rejections that you'll receive later. God, I don't know why I do it.
Well, I mean, what would you say to people who are, sort of maybe worried, sort of like apprehensive about showing their work to other people, or who sort of think, well, would that make it sort of like less mine? These are sort of, questions that I'm sure you've sort of had fielded, from people at the sort of the writing events that you do. I mean, from your experience, that's obviously that's a process that you find very helpful, sharing with others and sort of getting feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, actually, I wouldn't be able to write half my books if I didn't have my sister to ring up and say, please help. I can't see my way through the wood. And I do this all the time, and she does it to me as well. And because my sister's a writer as well, I find it, obviously for me, it's much easier talking through someone else's book, because I can see more clearly where her mistakes are, or her plot errors are, or her characters, and she does the same for me. And without that process, I'd find that, I wouldn't be able to work through my own problems, because sometimes you just need someone to come in and have a look and say, okay, I can see why you're struggling. You just need to pull this thread out a little bit more. And the thread is always there. This is the thing. You should have faith in your writing, because the threads are always in there. But sometimes you just need help you need someone else to come and point them out and say, no, look, it's there, but you need to, here it is. This is the problem. Maybe you just need to draw this element out. So for me, it's always been very helpful. And I think, the thing about being frightened to share, I mean, everyone feels that. Everyone's, my God, I'm writing this new book at the moment, and I don't know what Sistersong seems to, be finding, an audience, and people are finding it, they're really enjoying the book. And now that makes me more terrified about writing the current one, because I feel like, it's going to be, there'll be endless comparisons to it. And I think that is my bête noire at the moment. I have to try and get over, having a book that, has been loved, like Sistersong, but then being able to write another book that is in the same vein but isn't Sistersong, and to be okay with putting that out and saying that, yeah, it's a different book and it will be compared inevitably, but you have to, it's a different story. You have to just keep doing the best you can and keep moving forward,
right?
If you like it.
We're coming down to our last, we probably got sort of like max 10 minutes, and that's me being a bit generous with some overrun. So quick answers to these. So Sistersong's going to the US, isn't it? And somebody earlier, I'm so sorry, this was back when the questions were coming up really fast and I didn't get a note of your name, but somebody said, who would you want to play the characters if it makes it to the screen?
Oh no, I don't say that, because I'm really terrible and don't really know the names of any actors, and I'm just awful when it comes to acting stuff. But so saying that, obviously Keen's transgender. I wouldn't want, if it was on the screen, obviously I would like a transgender person to play Keen, because that's really important to me. I wrote this novel to look at representation and to try and kind of, I would never call it a transgender book, or anything, but it's such a big part of Keen's character and who he is, that, if it got translated to the screen, I'd want that to carry over. But as for the other two, goodness, I don't know. Everyone, who do you want to play? And I'm like, okay, I'm sure everyone can do it.
That's a question for you to lie awake at night tonight thinking about. You will not sleep tonight because you will be fan casting your book. Okay, I can guarantee that. Right. Somebody, this is a great question. I totally relate. Somebody said, do you ever find it difficult to function in reality when you're in the middle of writing your book, or, when you're caught up in your book world, right?
Yeah. Because you very often walk around and something will spring into your head, and then you will be back there again in your world. You'll be back there with your characters, not here. But I've lived all my life like that. In fact, I used to get told off at school for daydreaming, and I like to tell people that I get paid to daydream now. So I feel like I feel somewhat, you know, happy that that came full circle, and I'm allowed to actually do that. But yeah, it can be a bit, yeah, it's nice to do events like this. It's nice to like chat to people, because you can get swallowed up in your own dreamland, and your own stories. Writing is quite a lonely pursuit, so it's quite nice being able to get out and talk to readers, and you know, share my interior world a bit, so it's not just me.
Yes, Daniel said down here, fantasy is so much better than reality. Well, I think, again, like, you are among your kind here, Daniel.
I am, and yes, it is. Yes, we're all amongst our kind. I love it. I love fantasy, but it's even cooler when it intersects with reality.
We've had some lovely questions from Michelle. So Michelle, yes, this is, when we're done here, this is going to be posted to the Waterstones Instagram TV widget button thingy. So anyone who wants to watch this back, if you've just sort of, you know, joined us for the final 10 minutes and you're like, wow, that sounded so amazing, I must listen to the whole hour, it will be there on the Waterstones Instagram TV. But a couple of Michelle's questions, they're great questions, and we have about 3 minutes. So one of them is world building. How do you go about world building? Particularly in this case, which is a sort of a blend of the real and the fantastical. And she also wants to know about your 3 character names. Now, character naming is so weird, isn't it? It's so hard. Like,
yeah, okay.
I find they just come to you. So how did you name your 3 characters here?
Okay, so with just a few exceptions, all the people in Sistersong they're all historically accurate names, as far as the internet is any judge of this. So they're all, I've got several websites full of, you know, early medieval naming, you know, actual examples that have been found. So yeah, pretty much all my names they do have some historical relevance. Reva and Keen, I'm not sure how much about Reva, but Keen is certainly Cornish, in its kind of etymology. The only one of the main characters that I actually made up is Sina, and I don't really know where that came from. This Sina's name went back to like 9 years ago when I first had the idea for the book, and it's spelled Sinne, which is just stupid because it looks like a Sini. Nobody will ever know how to pronounce it apart from me. But I don't know, I just liked it as a word. I thought it looked cool. And I'm sure I think someone told me like it might be like Finnish or something, and I was like, oh god, that's the only one that then does not fit in my British setting. So I apologise for that, because that was just me and my weird conceit.
So so world building was the other part of Michelle's question. I mean, you know, obviously you had a lot of raw materials there, in that you had, you know, the ballad, you had you know, sort of historical evidence about, you know, sort of folk beliefs and magic, even sort of magical ideas. So you had a sort of a framework there. You had you know, sort of Gildas's chronicles. So obviously you had a sort of a whole lot of elements. I mean, did you know, Michelle's question sort of generally is, you know, kind of just how did you go about building out that world? I mean, I know some authors, for example, kind of create like kind of really comprehensive, they almost write kind of like, you know, tourist guides to their kingdoms, and, you know, sort of like dating profiles for their characters, so that they kind of have that as a record. Is that something you do, or does it evolve?
No, it really doesn't. I don't do anything. I don't have world Bibles. I don't really have even that many notes. I said I'm quite organic writer. I'm also quite an organic world builder. I tend to build the world as I go along. And in that, when you're writing from a close first person perspective, it's actually quite helpful to build it as you go, because you have to bear in mind that this character, depending on who they are, where they were born, how old they are, they're only going to be aware of a small slice of their world at any one time. Only the author or a god, omniscient narrator, would be aware of every aspect of the world on the sort of level that, you know, the authors are aware of their worlds. And obviously, if you are, then I think the danger is the temptation to let that bleed into, you know, your first person perspective, which then, you know, kind of invalidates it somewhat and makes the character seem less realistic. So I tend to do all my world building on the go, and I develop the things that need developing, and I research the things that need researching when I come across them, which sounds a little bit hairy. It is. I'm sure there are plenty of people who do it in a much more structured, standard way. That's probably quite helpful for them. But for me, it's so much a part of creating a character, and it's so much a part of the storytelling, this idea of learning as you go along, so we all learn together kind of thing, that I feel like, you know, just slipping in this information kind of as the character learns it is the most, it creates the most believable characters.
Well, I believed every word of it. It is now past, which I think we're imminently about to like overstay our welcome. But thank you so much for this absolutely wonderful, gorgeous gift of a book, which, as I said, made me cry. If you've been watching this and you haven't got a copy of Sistersong, do yourself a favour and get one. When you do get your copy of Sistersong, and when you love it, please leave it a review, because all of these things, they really help sort of get the word out there. And this is a book that I have come to love, you know, sort of so deeply, and I would love to see it reach as many people as possible. I really, really would. You can, of course, get copies in your local Waterstones, which are now all open. Yay!
Yay! And this...
they're all open, but I mean, bookshops are open. Yay!
Yes, and a signed copy is available. Woo!
Woo! Signed copies. Woo! And Lucy, you can find Lucy on you can find her on Instagram at Sylvan Historian, SILVAN Historian, Sylvan Historian, and you can also find her on Twitter under the same handle. So if you've got any more questions for her, either about the book or writing craft or anything at all, you know, she would love to hear from you. So we'll draw this to a close. I am then going to try and find the right button to post this to the Waterstones Instagram TV. So as I said before, if you didn't catch all of it and would love to read it, then do.
Thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic.
Thank you, Dale.